For many people, they know you as Ponga Liwewe until I got to learn of the longer version. Ponga Liwewe. Thank you for taking time. First off, out of curiosity, what does Ponga mean and why Ponga to many people?
Yeah, it's. I'll give you the shortened version of the story. Pasipononga means Pans Paononga. The ground or the earth is ruined. Born during a drought period. That was my granddad's name because it relates to the earth being ruined in the village where they lived because of a drought. The Ponga came about because my little sister, or my older sister, Linda, who was 2 years older than me, couldn't pronounce the full name. So her version was Ponga, and everybody at home started to say Ponga.
So it's a nickname.
And that's how it has stuck.
It's a nickname.
It's a shortened version.
Shortened version.
A child's shortened version.
Okay, but totally legal. Welcome. Let's talk about your story in football. A little bit tells me we start from 1974. Apparently, this is Zambia's first appearance at the Africa Cup of Nations. And you're 8 years old at the time. And yeah, Slav at first sight, could you say?
Yeah, well, I remember, when you're 8 years old, I know my dad has traveled to Egypt. So you're now thinking, oh, what is he going to bring for me? You're more interested in the toys than the result at that age. But when he came back, you could see a mood, an excitement, and you say, oh, okay, something big has happened in football. And then you realize, from the reaction in the public, the excitement, that Zambia has done something, made an achievement. And that was when, in 1974, Zambia was runner-up in the 1974 Africa Cup. So we didn't take the trophy, but being runner-up in itself, at the first time of the first qualification, I think that was as good as winning in the eyes of the Zambian public.
So the party pooper was Mulamba Ndiaye. A football match played over 180 minutes, and yeah, we failed to win at the first time. What was the feeling at the time as an 8-year-old?
Well, I felt, the excitement was there in the public, and I think that's when I started to wonder, this thing seems to be exciting. And I started to go to the stadium with my dad. I think 74, he left Kitwe and was transferred to Lusaka. I remember watching a game between City of Lusaka and Nkwazi, a 3-1. This is in that time period. And I cried. I was supporting City. You're a kid and you have emotions. City is not my team, but for that particular occasion, I think it was one of the first games I watched, and my heart was so much in this team in black and white. And when they lost, I burst into tears. So I think that was the start of that emotional attachment to football.
I'm curious now, which team did Dennis Liwewe really support at club level?
Well, he said he didn't support any team. But if you asked people in Chingola, they would tell you that he supported Nchanga Rangers because he worked there in his early days. I think Willie Piri was probably one of his most favorite players. And the Chingola guys will whisper in your ear that he supported Nchanga, but publicly he always said he was neutral. But I think his voice was a notch higher when Nchanga was playing.
A notch higher. And we thought that he was a very loud man. But tell me something. Many kids would grew up, this football thing was sort of a taboo. You needed to do it like you are selling drugs in the home. Now, your father is legendary commentator, and you're growing up with someone that's that passionate about the game. Just tell us your interactions with him and him beginning to see his son loving the same thing that brings bread and butter on the table.
Yeah, I think my brother and I, his name is Liwewe, I think we went to almost every game that was within reach. Obviously, when he was on the Copper Belt, we wouldn't travel with him, but if it was a local game here in Lusaka, Woodland Stadium, Edwin Imboela, we watched Green Buffaloes a lot. In fact, my first love was Green Buffaloes. And the player who really touched me, who really excited me, was their captain, Dick Chama. In fact, sometimes after the game, we would force my dad to take us to Arakan Barracks and say, well, we have to see Dick Chama. because he was big, he was strong, he was the captain of the national side. He led by example. You know, he was probably one of the best defenders, and unfortunately, due to maybe lack of footage, you know, he's not much spoken about. But he was the captain of the side, and his leadership qualities were exemplary.
Now, let's just talk about fast forward. I'm sure 8 years old, you probably need to double school and this passion for football. How was it? What was Dennis Liwewe's attitude towards you doing your homework, ensuring that schoolwork was done and all this stuff? Or was it a political fireball that
No, he was very strict.
Took mom to the left and dad to the right?
He was very serious when it came to school. I mean, I remember, I think it was in my 5th grade at Woodlands Primary School. I came 5th, and he was very unhappy. He says it's unacceptable, you know, to come number 5. You have to be first or second. Those were the standards he set for us in terms of schoolwork. So it was really the need to put a lot of effort with your schoolwork. But on the weekends, you know, we would jump in his car, go to the stadium. And I would say I was fortunate because I was able to interact with players.
You didn't have sanctions for passing number 5?
No,
Football sanctions?
When he just raised his voice a bit, that was enough to make you, you know, reconsider. He was not the sort of person to raise his hand against you. But I think just the fact that he was unhappy with you made you feel that you really had to push harder, work harder. You had to deliver what he wanted. And he never really raised his voice, but just the change in his tone about him not being happy with your result was enough to make you pull up your socks.
The ultimate alpha male?
Yeah, well, you know, a gentle person with the kids. He was our family leader, but with us, he was, I think he gave us the room to express ourselves, the room to be free. You know, a lot of my friends would say, you know, when my dad walks into the house, we disappear from the sitting room, you know. But we were never brought up like that. We were able to chat, we were able to talk. We had very few restrictions. As long as you behaved yourself, conducted yourself properly, you know, you were allowed to express yourself and your opinions.
Okay, let's just fast forward to you as a broadcaster now. 1987, you make your debut behind the microphone. How did that happen?
Yeah, I used to go with him. You know, we would be in the commentary box watching the game alongside him.
Where you needed to be very quiet, I want to presume.
Well, you could only really shout when there was a goal because the whole stadium was cheering and screaming. But, you know, you watch the game and he's there doing his commentary. There are times he would be sweating and, you know, he would carry a flask of water and his notepad where he has written the lineup. So during let's say there's a player injured, he would quickly have a glass of water and we would be there standing next to him. And then one day there was no co-commentator. Usually they would put somebody to analyze, and then he didn't have a co-commentator. I was standing there next to him, and all of a sudden he asks me for my view. What's
How
your
old
view on
were
what is
you?
happening? 1987, I was 21. Still just out of my teens, but I used to follow football religiously. The World Cup for me was the ultimate. I could watch a 1 hour video and narrate the whole narration by the person narrating the video, because I watched it maybe 50, 60, 70, 80 times just to see Maradona, to see Michel Platini, to see all those great players. So, you know, football, both international and local, was really something that really touched my heart.
Were you surprised all of a sudden you're talking, and for many years you've been in the commentary booth and never got to say anything, and now, were you surprised that he asked you to say something?
I was caught by surprise, you know, but I've watched, as I said, I watched World Cups, I watched I would listen to the analysis. I had heroes in the commentary team, people like Barry Davies, John Motson. Those were the BBC commentators in those days. Somebody like David Pleat, who even today is still analyzing international matches. The way he spoke about the tactical side of the game, his analysis of what was happening on the field. So I think I had in my subconscious the understanding of those movements, why players did this, why players did that. And when I was asked the first time, I think I was able to respond adequately, because thereafter I started to do it on quite a few occasions, and even for the international games, and the response from the public was actually quite good. So
what was the response on Dad's face?
Well, I don't think he was in his commentary mode, so his mind was focused on the game. But I think afterwards he said, you spoke quite well. So, maybe on one or two occasions, if there's no one else, I'll be able to give you the mic to say a few things. But the public, when I went out there, were saying, you spoke very well, you understand football. And I think that's how I got now into the media side of the game.
Wasn't it a political fireball? We live in a country and society that hates nepotism with a passion. And I'm thinking, this man has brought his son to do commentary with him. Yeah. Were there trickles and flashes of that feeling? Maybe
behind the scenes. Although I remember when I went to the Olympics in '88, I had traveled as a fan, soccer fan, and I was given the mic because I don't think there was a co-commentator as well. But I think one or two other journalists, said, no, this man, how can he give his son and this? But I think it died because the response from the public, whenever I did my analysis, whenever I worked with my dad, the response was 99% positive. You'll always find that 1% who, for their own reasons, are not happy. But if the public backs you, if they're satisfied with the work you're doing, I don't see any reason why they would complain.
When your commentary career was budding, did it actually feel like something that was unwanted to be known as Ponga Liwewe, the son of Dennis Liwewe?
Well,
was it pressure?
I don't think so. It was, I did what I could. I'd studied football, I'd read football. Later on in life when I was at university, I had more football books than university books from an early age. I was reading football constantly, understanding, who are the top players in the world, what they do, the best teams, the tactics, the formations, 4-4-2, 4-3-3. At the time, I think in the 70s, there was even 4-2-4 with only two players in midfield. So the evolution, I had books on the evolution of football tactics. So I think I was able to understand, and there wasn't really pressure. My dad, he had co-commentators, but I think when I did it 1, 2, 3 times, ZNBC were very happy for me to continue doing it. And that's how I got involved in that role. And I never got a single penny for it, though.
Oh! You're a good man. Your passion took you places, to say the least. But over and above, you have been to 8 Africa Cup of Nations, starting with Algeria 90. Annaba it was called, right?
Yeah, Zambia was based in Annaba. I actually got there at just before the semi-final stage. Now, my dad had traveled with the team. I was at university. And those days, there were a lot of issues in the Zambian economy. So one businessman, foreign exchange was a problem. So one businessman says to me, look, I need some foreign exchange. So can you apply? I will apply for the foreign exchange for you to travel with me, and you give me the foreign exchange. I said, well, no problem. I'll fend for myself when I get there. I'll buy my own air ticket. You can keep the forex. So I walk into my dad's hotel, and he sees me walking in, and he's shocked. How did you get here? I said, nah, business. As a student, I was still at the university. So all my friends were shocked to hear me commentating for the semi-final of Africa Cup of Nations while they were in class, of course.
Okay, let's talk about school and football. So Algeria, we actually had a fairly decent tournament, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, our star player was Webi Chikabala. I think, Kalusha and Charles didn't travel. So it was largely local players. I think Lakim Siska came, Stone Yirenda came as well. But the rest of the 2 key players who were Kalusha and Charles were not in the team. So the expectations were not that high. But from the first game, Chikabala scored against Cameroon, a header in the 58th minute. And he wasn't the tallest of players, but he was an all-action player. He'd be all over the field. He would be chasing, challenging, running. He was like an action man of football. And he became the star player of that, almost the star player of that tournament. All the French magazines, that time we had a magazine called Afrique Football. He was plastered all over the magazine. And from there on, he went to a career in Portugal, where he played for Maritimo. And then he went on to Belgium, where he had a spell with Ast. And then he came back. Sadly, he passed away, but he was a player who believed in himself, and he was a player who, when he was on the field, you were assured that it was going to be 90 minutes of action in attack.
Let me just bring in this dimension. Your friends were in class, you were in the commentary box, and I'm sure I don't know, socially speaking, how respected was what you were doing compared to your training? What would be the reaction on the part of your peers at school?
I think my friends were quite excited, because they knew when I come back, I'll narrate all the stories and this and that, who was in the team, what happened. Before that, of course, before in 88, I went to the Olympics in South Korea, which was even a bigger impact for the public and for my friends. Because again, I think, I took a few days off. I left school. I was able to get myself to South Korea with my dad's support. He paid for my ticket, and then I was involved in the commentary. So I think my friends were happy that, he's going to tell us the inside stories of what happened. But of course, I think football had a little bit of an impact on my academics because, as I said, I had 2 piles of books, more football books than school books. And I read more football than school. So it had an impact. On 2 occasions, I had to repeat my academic year because I didn't pass all my subjects. And then I think in my last 2 years, just after the Africa Cup, I had traveled to the UK, and I got for about 3 months because the university had been shut. We had one of our closures. Even that time, we were having the same issues the universities have today of the government shutting down the university. So my sister was studying, and I went to visit her for 3 months. I said, look, I can't just sit here. Let me try and raise a bit of cash so that when I go back to school, at least I have a bit of pocket money. I can buy 1 or 2 things. I worked in a supermarket, and it was tough, real hard work. And I think from then on, I said, look, when I go back to university, I had better clear this course. Because if I don't pass my university, I may end up doing these kind of difficult jobs, which, you really sweated, and it really took a toll on you physically. I remember going home and just falling asleep before I could even eat my dinner. Physical work was really tough. But it pushed me and it drove me. And I think in the end, I got my degree, and it has helped me. Although I've still worked in football, but I've been able to fall back on my degree when I needed it.
Now, when I was looking at your little profile, 1984 to 1991, that's a long time. Well, you could have given up. I mean, and maybe because football was not paying you at the time, so you had to put your stuff together.
Yeah, we had the 2 closures also. That contributed to the length of my stay there, but also my academic performance wasn't to that level. But I think at the end of the day, I said, look, is it going to be a life of, menial jobs? Or is it going to be a life of at least, a job that can support me? And I said, nothing will stop me from doing my football, but I need a backup. So let me get this backup. Otherwise, it's going to be very, very difficult in case the football thing doesn't materialize.
And I'm thinking, you were turning out to be a celebrity. Your father was the ultimate footballing celebrity, almost like the face of football, the personification of the 12th man. Or before we even got to the 12th, he was the 12th man, the crowd was probably the 13th man. Why did you have such worries? Did he make it clear to you that I'm me and you are you and do you and outdo me?
Look, I told you earlier about how during primary school he wasn't satisfied with somebody coming number 5, with myself coming number 5. So during my tough time at university, he gave me a poster which I stuck on my wall. And it said, I have only one ambition, to be the best. That is all there is. And that was he never raised his voice about my performance, but he just gave me that poster, to be the best. And I read it and I said, look, I'm not going to let him down. I'm not going to let myself down. I'm not going to let my family down. And it drove me to succeed at the end of the day. And when I lifted that degree in 1990, we had a delay to the graduation ceremony. We had a graduation ceremony 2 years later, I think 93. And when I had that thing in my hands, I said, look, you sweated for it, you worked for it, but you deserve it.
I'm just thinking, The economic situation was not the prettiest at the time, and the background was that immediately left school, the good government of the Republic of Zambia would always find something for school leavers to do. And by the time you're finishing, the structural adjustment program had kicked in and things were beginning to change. Did you anticipate that change, and is that why your attitude quickly changed and said, this football is too much of a risk?
Look, I thought, let me have a backup. I will try and work in football, but if it doesn't work, I can always go to
The corporate
with my
world.
degree, and I can walk into a company with my degree and say, okay, I'm looking for a marketing job, and I would be able to get that job. I said I have to have a fallback. So my first year after university, I worked for 1 year for a company called Nachera, a private company owned by the late Mr. Patrick Chiumya, who was a partner at KPMG and had his own businesses. After 1 year, I said, I don't think this working is for me, man. I need to get back into my football stuff.
It was boring.
My heart wasn't in it, and I believe that in life you must do something you're passionate about. If you're not passionate about your job will be a daily routine. Wake up, go to the office, come back. But you won't have the passion, the excitement, And then a friend of mine based in the UK, Emmanuel Maradas, he started a magazine called African Soccer Magazine, based in London. So he asked me to write for him an article. I think Zambia had played Tanzania somewhere. He said, write an article for me. So I got onto a typewriter that time and sent it to him. And he said, look, you wrote a very good article there. Would you be able to be doing stuff for the magazine? I said, fine, no problem. So I started to supply content to that football magazine. Maybe a lot of the guys older than you will remember African Soccer Magazine. I started, and then he says to me, we come out every 3 months, but I want to now start coming out every 2 months. Would you be able to work with me as a deputy editor? I said, fine. So I would fly to London, do some editing with him for a few months, and then come back. And I did that for about 3 years, running the magazine, African Soccer, as a deputy editor. And it became the best and the biggest magazine in African football. So that's how I drifted away from marketing into the football side. I still continue to do my radio, and now TV started to become more prominent, so I started to do work on TV in ZNBC as well.
You got hired finally?
No. I never worked there. I always did part-time work. And again, there was never a check. But I loved football, so I was happy to talk about it there. And so that's how my media work multiplied, from the magazine, still doing radio, now going into TV. And I focused on that. The magazine paid, so I was able to survive.
So it was good.
I was able to live off the magazine's earnings. I was also the distributor for Zambia, so we got a commission on the sales in Zambia. So I was able to at least put bread on the table.
To what extent did the Liwewe name open doors for you?
I think it did in a few ways, but again, I always said to myself, if you were not able to do the job, people wouldn't give you the job on a permanent basis. The magazine, for example, the guy asked me to write. He knew my dad because they met in '74 in Cairo at the Africa Cup of Nations. So this Emmanuel Marada says, oh, are you able to write an article for me? Yeah, so I wrote the article, and that was the beginning of my career as a magazine editor. So I think it did help me in a little way, but I was able to, take the opportunities and, maximize from them. Work hard, show that you can do the job, Later on, I went to South Africa. I don't think I used my name to get into that position. I think I was able, on my own merits, to establish myself there.
Is that what people really believe about you? Or have you lived your life actually saying, look, Dennis Liwewe is Dennis Liwewe. I am Ponga Liwewe or Ponga. Yeah. There's a difference. I'm a different man, he's a different man. Was there too much pressure for when you moved around doing that stuff and people would just look at you? It's not a big deal, Dennis Liwewe, son.
I think I always tried to be my own person, or I was always my own person. His style of media work, I mean, a couple of weeks ago we were doing a workshop with ABSA, with the media, and Ejem Jokoto did a presentation, and he was talking to the journalists, and he said, the problem we have in Zambia is that all you radio people want to be like Dennis Liwewe. You can't, you have to be yourself, because you will always be a cheap imitation. So you have to do things your own way. And I think for myself, I never tried to commentate like him. You know, I've got my own character, my own personality. You know, when you did an interview with him, you would see his excitement and all that. You know, I'm more calm, I'm more reserved. And that's my way of...
I'm thinking that. So I'm trying to paint the picture of people who never had the opportunity to listen to you and your dad sharing the booth and doing commentary on one game. But one is up there, the other one is cool, calm and collected. And as you said,
in the commentary box, you know, because he commentated from emotion, you know, and I would say, no, we need to do this. You know, he says we have to attack all out. I say, no, we need to keep possession.
You didn't believe in opening fire.
We have to keep possession. We are leading now. You know, time is running out. We have to slow things down, keep it tight, don't concede a goal. You know, and he wanted the team to attack. We had the differences of opinion.
I was, and talking about differences of opinion, I was young, listening to radio commentary, because the trend back in the day would be, we would switch off the TV commentary and let Dennis Liwewe run us through. And you were doing commentary with your dad. I just can't remember the game, but I remember, I think he asked you something and you went like, Dennis, then blah, blah, blah. And then he went like, don't call me Dennis, I'm your father. So was that angry, or he was like, okay, let's go.
You know, I've had this debate before. I don't remember ever uttering that, but I think it started as a...
You don't remember calling him by name?
Never.
How would you address him in the commentary box?
I think it started as a sort of joke. I wouldn't say his name, I would just answer. So he says, Ponga, what do you think? Then I'll answer, okay, I think, you know, they have to play tight at the back. They have to close them down. We have to be alert. And then I'll give the mic back to him. I would never say anything. But the public...
You dare not call him Dennis?
No. I mean, we were brought up as African children, and you could never do that. And if I did that, you know, I don't remember it. But the public have this, I think it started as a bit of a joke, and it's sort of... People now in their minds believe that thing actually happened.
Or maybe I was listening to a joke, but
probably.
You never said that.
No.
You'd never say it.
No, of course not.
Never.
No. Would you call your dad by his first name?
I'm just thinking. If we're in the commentary box, I'm just thinking.
The emotion of commentary.
It's something that we could consider. Let's talk about the 1993 Africa Cup of Nations. Your dad, 1994 actually. Yes. This is on the backdrop of Zambia losing its entire team, and we saw Dennis Liwewe weeping on national TV. He was really attached. What was the feeling in the Liwewe household when that happened? How was he at home?
It was devastated. It was devastating for everybody, myself included, because, you know, I was the same age as a lot of those guys. We would socialize. When Power Dynamos are in town, for example, Wisdom Chancer was my closest friend. We would go out, we would visit the nightclubs, we would see the nightlife of Lusaka, we would have lunch at home, you know. So I developed a lot of friendships among them. But for him, I think he took it probably more worse than I, because he fell ill, and the government then flew him to South Africa, where he had heart treatment. So it was devastating for my whole family. I think.
So it was real passion. It was nothing for the camera. Dennis Liwewe was a football fanatic to the core.
He was 100%. I mean, those boys were like his own kids. The way he traveled with them, joked with them, encouraged them, you know. After the game, he would talk to them, go into the dressing room, say, well done, and this and that. If they lost, he would console them, you know. So it was quite devastating for the family, you know. I also felt it was probably one of my most difficult times. And, you know, it was up to my mom and the rest of the family to sort of try and lift us. but probably the worst thing that has ever happened to me in my life, to see all those young lives lost and all those young people, suddenly their lives terminated like that.
Dennis Liwewe felt we should continue. He had a very strong voice that galvanized the country in a very special way. And we had to continue. When there were 201 excuses to probably say, you know what, let's rethink. This football thing is probably not for us. Were you somewhat scared about this passion for football? Your friends had died in very tragic circumstances.
You know, at the beginning you are so devastated, so depressed, you know, football is the last thing on your mind. And then I think when you think about it, you say, you know, this game, these guys lost their lives, let's do something for them. Let's see what we can do. Let's show the world, you know, that they did not die in vain. Let's show the world that, you know, Zambia can come back. Let's do it in their honor. Let's do it in their names.
When did you feel like that with conviction and say, done with mourning, back to war?
I don't think we could ever be done with mourning. I mean, even to this day, you know, last week I was in the area and I went through the memorial site again, just 4 or 5 days ago, you know, because I was in that area. So we would never be done with the mourning for those guys, but we felt, you know, a better tribute to them would be to rise in their honor, to show the world, you know, that although we lost our friends, but in their honor we are going to show the world what we can do. And I think Zambia did that by reaching the final of the Africa Cup, by almost qualifying for the World Cup for the first time. 15 minutes away from the World Cup.
Tell me something. You call yourself the pragmatic one, the sober one, totally unlike Dennis Liwewe, Canon Dennis Liwewe. Do you still believe Jean Fidel Diramba really robbed Zambia today, 2019?
You know, I watched the game. When you watch the game in the heat of the passion, you know, you see it differently when you sit down and analyze it later. Diramba's incident or incidences, I felt there were 1 or 2 occasions, you know, the example when Charles Musonda got kicked in the face was probably an opportunity for a penalty. There were a couple of occasions, but I think we maybe emphasized that Diramba was involved in bringing the Zambian team down. You know, I think there was a lot of emotion at the time because we were coming off the back of the air crash and the loss of the team. But did he really blatantly go out to deny Zambia a place in the World Cup? You know, we see even today's refereeing decisions, you question them. You know, it wasn't as blatant. What I'll say is it wasn't as blatant when you watched it the second time as when you watched it during the
He didn't rob us.
He could have given us a penalty.
There were demonstrations in Lusaka. I think people gathered along Cairo Road where the first officers were.
Yeah.
Where was your heart?
I knew FIFA would never...
On that matter?
I knew FIFA would never give us a replay. I understood the emotions. I understood the public's desire for that World Cup, the public's belief that we could have got that penalty and, you know, gone to the World Cup. I understood all that. But knowing the rules of FIFA, the governance of FIFA, in my mind it was always clear. We even sent the vice president there, but it was futile. It was never going to be a reversal of the decision.
Did you dare say that in the presence of Dad? That Dad, look, relax.
I said it to my friends, but I never raised that point to him. I could see that his emotions were high, that he believed that, you know, we have to get our place back. We have to go to the World Cup. So I never raised that issue with him. But with my personal friends, I discussed it and I said to them, you know, FIFA can never make a decision to go.
You're the absolute bookworm. Did he ask for any advice, any input about that thing? And what did you publicly say about that one?
No, publicly, I don't think I really made a comment. He was the one in the driver's seat, dealing with the public and you know, backing the beliefs of the fans that we should get FIFA to replay this game. I kept a back seat. You know, my opinion was that you know, when we see referees give penalties, sometimes they don't.
We've talked for this long, and Mrs. Dennis Liwewe is not in the picture. What kind of person was she?
She's very calm, reserved, keeps a back seat all the time, but firm. When we were growing up, she was the one who instilled the discipline, more than my dad. So she was the one who guided us, who pointed us in the right direction. She was the one who held the family together, because a lot of the time my dad was traveling. If he wasn't on the copper belt, he was out of the country. So she was the one she was the glue that held us together. Made sure we did our work, made sure we behaved, made sure we were disciplined, made sure we went to church. You know, she's been the backbone of the family during the time that he was unavailable, traveling all over the world or traveling with the national team.
And I'm tempted to ask. I'm now sure she now becomes a standard for what a woman should be.
I think she did a great job bringing us up. And you know, you said my character is different from my dad's. I think my character is more in her direction, in that, you know, I'm not as excitable or as flamboyant or, you know, as very sociable. Like my dad walking down the street would be stopped, or he would stop and suddenly even do a commentary there in the street. I could never do something like that. My character is more with her.
When Zambia wins a football match and loses, what happens in the Liwewe household?
Oh, well, in the time my dad was here, it would be, you know, he would be quiet. You know, I think the whole house would be quiet, because my brother, himself, whoever was here would, you know, it would be depressing. It would be like...
Nobody dares talk to him.
No
cheap small talk about...
I mean, nobody even wanted to talk. None of us was in the mood to talk with anybody. So everyone would just be in his little corner there, you know, maybe a day later.
Dinner table?
Quiet. Just eat and then go to your room. You know, everybody felt the defeat. Everybody felt the pain. You know, you would feel, okay, this team can take us to the World Cup. Algeria in 1985, after we beat Cameroon 4-1, we felt we were going to go to the World Cup. And Algeria came and beat us. They beat us 2-0 there. We thought, we beat Cameroon 4-1 here. We're going to overturn them in the second leg. And they beat us 1-0. You can imagine, you know, how down we were, because if this team can't take us to the World Cup, when will we go to the World Cup?
Yeah, and that's probably the biggest elephant in the room. For many years, Zambia tried to go to the World Cup, and it hasn't happened to date. Very difficult. But let's talk about CAN 96, shall we? Bloemfontein is the stage. After the sentimental journey to the final in Tunisia, where you actually traveled, let's talk about the Bloemfontein Africa Cup. What was the expectation? Was third failure?
No, I think it was a good achievement, because I remember I wrote an article for the magazine I was working for, you know, and Raoul Paulson was the coach, and he said, no, he came up to me and said, you were very negative in your article. You know, I thought you didn't give us credit. And I think the team had started to change now from the generation that had died in the plane crash, because in 1984 in Tunisia, we had a lot of the players like Modern who were in the same age group as that generation. But in 96 now, younger players started to come in. I think that was when the change started to happen. In my personal view, those players were not of the same quality as the team which had perished, or the team which succeeded the one which had perished. So I believe that we would not do that well in that tournament. So I would say, you know, to come third was good enough, but I could see already that there's an evolution happening. And the people coming in, the players coming in, are not at the same high standard as the ones who were there in the past. They were good, but not that standard.
Where did the system begin to crash and fall, so to speak? It's because some generation, okay, we're at CAN 92, we're at 94 still, even after the tragedy, managed to finish second. At 96, third, the new generation is coming in. When did our conveyor belt break, and how did it break with hindsight in your view?
It broke, I think, in probably at the beginning of the decade, from about 1991 or so, because we suddenly have a change in government. Suddenly the policies now are geared towards privatization. So what happens to ZCCM? Now the thinking is to break it up into different components and sell it. And so all the structures that generated the best players, that built Zambian football were on the mines. Suddenly you have a situation where, you know, the mines are in a crisis, so the teams start cost cutting. You know, clubs that had 4 or 5 youth development teams suddenly have only one now. They have one team plus the senior team. In fact, some of them only had the senior team because they didn't have the resources to run these things. All the programs in the mining community, in the welfare centers, in the clubs, in the mining divisions, all those suddenly grind to a halt. You're going to only see the effects of that a few years later. So probably 96, 97, you know, when South Africa knocked Zambia out of the World Cup and suddenly, you know, we were in disarray, you could see that we don't have that crop of players who went through the mill, that played football at primary school. Even schools football fell apart. We had economic crisis. So suddenly there's no more schools football, no more ZCCM facilities, no more ZCCM football, no more clubs with 6, 7, 8 development teams, youth teams. Suddenly half the clubs in the league collapse because there's privatization, and we've lost teams like so many teams that were there in the earlier decades suddenly ceased to exist.
Let me ask you this, and I want to put you on the spot. At the time, you are educated, you've got a degree, so the country is looking up to you. You people who went to school inherited a program that was created by people with what? Certificates, grade 9 maybe, or form 2 or form 5. They created that system for football, and it went on for many years. And then when we had more graduates as a country, ideally we were more intelligent as a people, we took that decision. And anyway, I tried to read a bit of history, but I don't remember too many people raising flags that what you're about to do is going even to affect the football side of things.
Look,
were you naive at the time?
You can't. I think it was up to football to change itself, to evolve, because you find a situation where, you know, we've adopted structures probably from the British, because schools football was very, very prevalent in Britain at the time. And then, you know, football evolves, and part of that evolution is, you know, now schools football in the UK is not a factor that much of a factor in development. Now you have academies, you've got teams that run academies that do development of the players. So we didn't catch on immediately that we have lost, you know, this structure, and we need a replacement. But even if you have the ideas, where are the resources going to come from? Because you are talking about, you know, a country restructuring from an economy that has been managed almost in a socialist manner to now switching to capitalism. So all these things of, you know, social development, youth programs, somebody buys a company and says, look, I'm here to make profit, so I'm not going to start pouring money in a football club before I start to make profit. Or I don't have the money to focus on football. That's your own business. I'm here to generate revenue from this company. That's why I bought it. So that was the change.
So grey matter let us down?
No. Firstly, funding let us down, because you've got clubs.
No, I'm thinking you're supposed to be the ones to raise the flag and say, ladies and gentlemen, wait, there's a pink elephant in the room. Yeah, because the effect is probably far-reaching. It's not only football, it's other sectors as well. And from your vantage point, as a graduate of business administration from the Copperbelt University, we didn't hear the intellectuals. They didn't force a change. That's my point.
Transition is always difficult, and transition takes time.
So you couldn't do anything.
The way companies were transitioning from state-owned to private, you know, football also had to undergo its own transition. People running the game, you know, were so used to ZCCM writing a check and saying, Nkana, here's your check. You know, no need to look for, they felt no need to look for sponsorship. Okay, no need to worry about TV rights, because the companies gave you, ROP gave you a check. You know, that time it was Provident Fund gave you a check to run your club. So nobody said, what other alternatives, means of generating money are we going to have? Then suddenly the checks reduce, some of them disappear, some of them reduce. So you ask yourselves now, where are we going to get the money from? Now in football, you know, we have, traditionally football was run by lower level management in the companies. So the people in lower level management are not going to be able to make the type of decisions to resuscitate that team.
That's the problem we had.
That was one of the problems. Now when you look at football today in this era, you see more and more, the level of management has risen. Before it was, give it to the HR guy and the junior HR guy to run this football club and keep an eye on it. Now you see, you know, teams like Zesco, for example, have high-level management people involved in running of the clubs. Teams like Zanaco, they brought in Marlon from Supersport, who is a high-level manager. So you can see the level of management is rising, and you can see the changes now. They're looking for sponsorship, they're looking for marketing opportunities, you know, they're trying to increase the number of people flowing into the stadium. So the corporate changes have happened. Football is now becoming more commercialized. At the time, it was a social amenity.
With hindsight, you still defend the educated mass.
Yeah, because, you know,
then
the educated masses were not in football. They were in banking, they were in other aspects of the economy. They were sitting in the Bank of Zambia.
They were too far.
Yeah, they were not. Football was really run by, you know, the HR guy in the corner, give him to run the football club. It was, you see, you have companies, for example, like CEC or even Mopani. The level of managers you should have running the clubs are the level of people who can manage any company at that level. So somebody who is a CEO of, let's say, CEC, should theoretically, in a developed football economy, you should have that level of manager running a football club.
Let's talk about sentiment. And the biggest advert for love, raw love for Zambian football was your father. When these things began to happen, and I'll take you to Cannes 1998. Of course, we remember it for less than pleasant things. Bobo Dialaso kicked out in the first round. From a raw, fanatical point of view, what did it mean?
When I think now the lack of investment in youth football, in development, was now beginning to manifest itself. In fact, you know, I said to myself, the turning point, or the time people realized that there's a problem in Zambian football, is when in 1997, when South Africa beat Zambia 3-0 and knocked us out of the World Cup qualifiers. Because then Kalusha was 32, you know, coming to the end of his career, you know, and he was probably the one, you know, player of high level who we had in that team when we went to lose in South Africa. You know, we had, Litana was there, but he played in Saudi. He never really got into the European scene. So I think that team was now aging. And after 97, I could see that, you know, look at the young players coming through. They're not going to be able to maintain the momentum that these teams of the 80s and 90s had. So we're going to face a problem. In 98, we were out in the first round in Bobo Dioulasso. And thereafter, we were continually out in the first round until 2010. We didn't even qualify in 2004.
Was there failure to strategically realign ourselves as a country? The structure adjustment program kicks in and the effects are there for everybody to see. 96, you say, is a signal. 98, you don't need to be a college professor, a college degree to understand that there's something wrong here. But at the same time, you have people that are big cats in the corporate world running the Football Association of Zambia. Again, where did we fall? Yeah, you say at club level, low management. But at first level, I'm saying people with silky CVs.
Yeah, but
were they rendered powerless to to the current?
Now the people at the association are the policy makers of football. So when you realize that things have fallen apart at the grassroots, the focus has to shift to grassroots. I think we were slow to make that decision, or slow to realize that, you know, we have to invest in grassroots to be able to win at the national team. When the national team is playing, you know, the government will write a check, because government covers the costs of the national team, even today. So that is covered. But when we look at our development, we are not investing either from the corporate world or from the government side. I think we need to re-look and say, laying this foundation will lead to the national team's success. So if a fraction of that money that goes in the national team, let's say 10 or 20% was actually pumped into development, I think we would see a quality of player who can play in Barcelona, who can play in Real Madrid, who can play in Manchester United or Manchester City. We don't see that. So we are still very much on this journey of restructuring our development, and resources are critical. So we have a leadership that needed, at the time when we saw the decline, to channel resources into development, which we didn't do. That only started to come a little bit later. And even today, the model is not perfect. I would say we're churning out maybe 25–30% of what we should be in terms of youth development.
Well, it's glad I'm speaking to you, and because you're a business trend expert, we tried to do something at the beginning of the decade. Of course, change of government, structure adjustments, and now you had talk in football saying, no, we are going to have limited companies. I hear a team like Kawa Warriors had the bakery or started making blocks and whatnot. So I sense that there was a bit of realism to the whole thing, that, look, we need to make our own money. But at the same time, I look at the trajectory in terms of the cup competitions. We're all but sponsored by quasi-government institutions. Again, it was probably never as a result of marketing or business serendipity. But over and above, we tried at the beginning. Why did we fail?
I think football, I would lay a lot of the blame on football rather than government or the society at large. Because when your environment changes, you have to adapt to the changes. So the reaction of football was a little bit slow to the economic realities. You know, okay, you have to cut down, but you have to manage within the resources you have. You have to accept that we are not going to have this check every week from head office. How are we going to raise funds on our own? Nobody really tried to interrogate those things and put them into effect. So as I said, we lost maybe 200 clubs that existed. You know, every company had a club. Barclays had a club in the league. Suddenly they ceased to exist. We didn't have FNB then, but all the other banks, all the government departments had clubs. You know, all the companies had clubs. You could walk into a company called SCORE on the Copperbelt that provided services to the mines. There was a club called SCORE Limited. Suddenly, they are wiped out. So, as football, we had to say, look, we are undergoing probably our biggest crisis. How are we going to adapt or change? And I think we were slow to realize that, you know, we have to try and find our own money. We have to try and do this. You know, we have to maybe raise our level of management to be able to knock on the right doors who can give us money. We have to look, how are we going to make our clubs attractive for sponsorship, for marketing? Because sponsorship and marketing is not just knocking, oh, we want sponsorship. No. If you want sponsorship from a company or an institution, what are they going to benefit from giving you that check? We never asked ourselves those questions. Now we realize that, okay, as a company or as an association, people need to get value from giving us that check. So that's why there's marketing, that's why you see billboards, that's why you see press conferences on TV, this and that. We were slow to say, let's change and grab these tools, these marketing tools, and use them to sell our football, since we don't have this blank check anymore.
We've talked about running football as a business for many years, more than 3 decades, if I check again. And it looks like the reality of doing football as a business is that it's a jungle. It's not easy. Has it been a faction, a figment of our imagination that we can actually run football? Think about the last 3 decades and look at where we are today.
We can run football. I mean, look at the emergence. I'll give you an example of 2 clubs, Lusaka Dynamos and Buildcon, who are funded by private companies. These are clubs that, you know, previously were unheralded.
But seemingly same business model.
Yes.
That's my argument, is that Zamshi is not here today because it was sponsored by a company. But I'm thinking
by a parastatal company.
a parastatal company. I'm now thinking, now, if football is going to be a business, it has to be able to make its own money.
Correct.
But are we at a level today where we can exclusively, without arms, without PT, run football as a business?
It's a long-term process. So, you know, football should be able to generate maybe 50%, 60% of its own revenues. Over time, it will grow from 60 to 80 to 100 at some stage. How? We get a TV rights deal with Super Sport, where each club receives, you know, from the association right now, $20,000. Previously, the clubs they get $30,000 from the Super Sport deal per club. Okay. Previously, from MTN, they were only getting money from the awards. Now there's $20,000 per club. So you're now talking about 50,000, which maybe 10, 15 years ago was not there, going into the club's pockets. Then you say to yourselves, I've got perimeter advertising. SuperSport shows these matches regularly. I can go out to companies and say, I'm going to sell you a billboard for $1,000 per match for the whole season. We play what, 30 games? $30,000. You'll be on SuperSport. This is the exposure you'll get. You'll be seen in X countries, X number of times. Then a guy will say, okay, instead of putting my billboard on Addis Ababa Drive, where only the people who see Addis Ababa, who drive there, will see it, let me rather put it on the pitch, where on a match day, you know, the whole country, if Nkana is playing Power, is watching that game. So which will give me more value, the one on the pitch or the one on Addis Ababa? Only, okay, I'm going to put my money there. But you have to sell yourself as a club to football, or as a club or as an association to business. This is what I offer. This is your benefit. This is what the exposure you will get. If we qualify to the World Cup, you will even be recognized across the world. I'll give you an example. Before AIG advertised on Manchester United, how many of us knew there was a company called AIG? Very few people, you know. How many people knew, you know, I know Everton used to have Chang beer. How many people advertised, you know, how many people in the public knew that there was a Chinese beer called Chang? But we used to see it on the Everton jersey. Rwanda, as a country, have themselves on the Arsenal sleeve. And they've said that, you know, they pay $10 million a year for a 3-year deal, 30 million. Already they're talking about the benefits of people in the UK and around the world visiting Rwanda as tourists, because Rwanda's name is out there. So the relationship between sport or football and business now is non-negotiable. It has to be there. Otherwise, you'll find your pockets are empty and there's no ZCCM or Zambia State Insurance Parastatal to give you a check.
By the year 2000, it was curtains.
Disaster.
Really. Yes, we had won COSAFA twice by the year 2000.
I remember 1998. I went to watch a match in Woodland Stadium. I can't remember who was playing. And at halftime, you know, I asked myself, what am I doing here? It's not entertainment. I'd rather go home and watch a movie or
How
something.
many people were in the stadium?
You know, by that time, you could see the numbers dwindling because the quality was dropping. Now, if your quality is dropping, your gate takings are dropping. So you are in a catch-22 situation. Your money is dropping, so you can't develop. And your standard is low, so people will not come. So it was a difficult situation.